Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale, radio-controlled Armortek German King Tiger heavy tank. Since the last video update, a lot of progress has been made to the tank's suspension, and all of the road wheels, and as well as other lower hull components, have been added. We'll be going over all these modifications and additions in this video. Once the swing arms are all complete, it's now time to add the remainder of the lower hull components in order to get the tank with its wheels on. First, of course, is that of the final drives. The final drives of the tank are all illustrated out in the components that you see here. Now, these components should look very similar to the other versions that have been posted on my Armortek builds in the past, as the Armortek system basically is kind of universal and doesn't really change all that much between build to build. Starting from left to right, first takes us to these two little rubber seals that we have here. These here are found on all of the Armortek final drives and do a phenomenal job in preventing any sort of moisture or dirt from passing into the final drive cavity. Moving from the seals takes us to the ball bearings. These ball bearings will fit into the inside and outside portion of the final drive bell housing. Now there's only 4 that are going to be used for both of the systems. The remainder are going to be used for that of the rear idler system I'll go over shortly. This here is the motor mount. The motor mount is one solid piece of CNC'd aluminum. It's very robust, and this system has been utilized on several of the Armortek kits from around the 2009 and onward time frame. This, of course, is that of the final drive gear. It is one single piece of material that is machined down. It's made of steel, which means it's very strong. And the teeth are very nicely machined. Moving from the gear takes us to the final drive casing. It's one bell housing that is made from CNC'd aluminum. It has all of its recesses for that of the ball bearings and seals, which of course will be added after the filming of this take. All the way on the end here we have the final drive protective armor collar. These are found on many of the German tanks, from the Panther to the Tiger 1 and of course the King Tiger. They are made from CNC'd aluminum, which are cut to shape, and these will simply get mounted and bolted to the side of the hull. And here are the final drives in their process of being assembled. Now, as for the assembly, they're pretty straightforward. If anyone's seen any of my previous videos, you'll see, again, the same type of procedures that typically get done. One area I do want to point out, though, is that of the little seals. Just like I mentioned in the other videos, all of the Armortek tanks have this portion for sealing off the internals of the final drive from the external of the vehicle. Now, if you notice, the piece has a small little ridge on one side and is flush on the other. It is important to properly install this piece in the correct way, as it can be easily assembled in reverse. The correct way to assemble is like the way I have here on this final drive, in which the portion with the ridge is on the external portion of the final drive. If you look at the design, you'll see a small little taper on the inside. This is for the axle to slide over the piece and seal it off with ease. Installing it on the opposite way will cause problems with that of the installation. So it's important to keep this in mind when you're installing these seals on these Armortek final drives. At this point here, I can install the second bearing and then coat the inside and the final drive gear with that of grease. Also, at this point here, it's important to point out that, again, on all Armortek final drive gears, there's a small little bird that's left over from the machining process. It sticks out very minutely. However, one procedure that I do on these builds is that with a Dremel, I buff away this little tip, making it nice and flush with that of the rest of the gear, which makes installation, in my opinion, a lot more efficient compared to trying to fight this small little bird that's on the tip. Before I can go ahead and mount on the final drive, I need to first mount on the final drive protective collar. Now, this piece, like I showed earlier, is made out of a single piece of CNC'd aluminum. Now, like most pieces on the Armortek kit that are in this manner, some hand fitting is required in order to get it to fit to the tank in a nice, smooth way. This is done with that of a file, and I go ahead and remove some material on each section here, where these lugs make contact with the matching sections here on the hull. after a few swipes of the file, the piece will simply slide directly in place. Now, as for the mounting, this is facilitated by a single fastener that is found in this location here. The piece simply threads directly into the collar, which is tapped by Armortek. It's an efficient design, however, you notice you're going to have an external fastener to contend with. Rather than going with the stock unit, I went ahead and modified the piece by drilling a chunk of the material out. This is to make room for that of the fastener, which, once it gets fitted, will sink beneath the hole, which will then allow me the opportunity to remove this via the bodywork. Now, another modification I had to make was to these fasteners that you see over here. Now, on the Armortek kit, the way it's designed is that the final drive holes that mount on the fasteners are tapped and threaded on the remainder of the side of the hull. However, for these four here in the front, they are just drilled out through and through. The reason for this is so that you can secure this end here with that of a nut on the outside. Now, on the real Tiger 2, there is a similar feature found on this tank, and also most German tanks for that matter. The difference, however, is that on this tank here, if we notice, there are 4 fastener holes, while on the real Tiger 2 there would have been 3. Also, the way it works on the Armortek kit is that you would have the fastener nut on the outside, while on the real tank, the fasteners would have been on the inside portion and you would just see the tool heads. Furthermore, on top of that, the tool heads would have been recessed into the plate and would not stick out like they would on this model here. Now, to make this modification, it does require a little bit of modification to the tank itself. Here you can see the plate that's in progress of the modifications. You'll first notice that to do this modification, I have to do it in steps. The first step is to bore out the original 4 holes that secure the fasteners for that of the final drive. The reason for this is that when the final drive gets bolted on, the fastener locations that were originally found on the tank are still going to be utilized. However, once the pieces are fastened on, the heads will be blended and deleted with that of the bodywork. In order to do that, I need to bore out these sections here so that the fasteners fit in flush with the plate, thus allowing me to delete them with the bodywork at that point. Second part of the phase is to add the faux detail portions of the fasteners. Now, the way the kit is designed, where you have the 4 fasteners laid out, you do have 3 sections in the center of the fasteners in between that there are no fasteners present. On the real tank, these flush sections here are actually where the real fasteners would be. So to add them, I first need to drill out these 3 sections with that of a drill bit. That's the same diameter of the fastener that will be used. After they were drilled out, I then bore out the sections so that once the pieces are installed, you'll have the correct flush fitting type design with the fastener heads that are found on the inner portions. The first step in order to make the faux fastener locations is to drill out these sections here of the hull. Now, this is what I was referring to before, how you have the 4 fasteners that are found on the external portion of the model. In the sections in between are where I will add the new fasteners. I first center punched and drilled out these sections here with that of the drill bit. The reason why it's done on this portion here of the vehicle, as it's nice and flat and I could get the drill to get in here in a nice manner. Once the holes are drilled out, I can then go on the reverse side with that of the larger drill bit in order to do the boring, which will make the resemblance look like the way it did in the previous scene. And here's the armor collar, now mounted to the tank. As you can see, the fastener is nice and tucked inside of the plate, which now will allow me to delete this with the bodywork and smooth everything over. It is at this point here where I can install the final drive. Now, one point that I negated to mention earlier that's very, very important for a procedure like this is because of the thickness of the plate, you do have a lot of real estate to chew away to bore out the sections in order to have the flush fitting fasteners. One side note, though, is that you have to be very careful when you're drilling this section out, as you can easily remove too much material and go all the way through the plate, which will lead to nothing but problems, as now you have some repair work to do, and it's definitely something that is less than ideal and will ruin your day. So care must be exhibited by the builder who is undergoing a modification like this to not bore all the way through the plate and only remove just the right amount of material in order to bury the fasteners and still have a nice sturdy mounting location to install the piece. And here is the front now with its bodywork all completed and its weld work also now sculpted. Only thing that needs to be added now are that of the 3 little fasteners in these 3 locations here, which will be added shortly before the lower hull goes into its base coat of Dunkelgelb. Now, just prior to mounting on the final drive, the last bit of equipment that needs to be mounted is that of the motor mount donut. The donut that you see here gets affixed to these 4 locations on the tank. This is going to be mounted as is, stock out of the box, with the only caveat that you must use red Loctite for these fastener locations, as this is one portion that you absolutely don't want it to get loose or move around, as it's absolutely crucial that everything stays in line and firmly together. And here's the side of the hull with its bodywork also completed. The fasteners are completely blended into the side of the hull, and once painted will leave for a seamless appearance. With the final drives out of the way, it's now time to install that of the idler mounting system. First piece of equipment that needs to be mounted is that of the idler shaft mount itself. The piece is very similar in design to that found on Tiger 1s, but has a different appearance for that of the King Tiger. On the Armortek kit, it is comprised of a single piece of CNC aluminum that is pre-drilled and tapped. The way this piece installs is that you have the fasteners on the inside, and they thread directly into the piece. It's a very simple installation, and one that's very effective. Now, the piece, as you notice, has been primed, and it's ready for the installation. Now, the tolerances of the fit between the 2 pieces are going to be very tight, so I'm going to go ahead with a drum and remove a slight bit of material on the rim in a nice equal manner, which will clear enough tolerances for the piece to slide in place and get installed. With the material removed, the piece can now simply slide directly in place. It is at this point now where I can fix the fasteners. Of course, Loctite will be utilized. And just before I go ahead and add the idler equipment, the entire unit had its fastener holes deleted and sanded flush, and some sculpted weld beads have been added around the diameter of the piece. It is at this point now where the hull can enter into its base coat of yellow, to which then I can install the remainder of the components. Once the final drives and the idler systems are basically out of the way, the next area to focus on is that of the bump stops. Now, just like with the Tiger 1, and the Panther for that matter, the King Tiger utilized 4 bump stops on the side of the hull on the first and last sections of the swing arms. On the Armortek kit, these pieces are supplied, and the units are found here on the table. Now, the pieces consist of 2 components. We have here the main housing, and what is not present is that of a rubber bung, which gets inserted into this section here, and then a fastener holds it in place. The units are made from CNC'd aluminum and are very strong and are very functional. They do the job very well, one mounted as per the kit. However, just like with the T34 project video update that I recently published, in which had a similar type of component, these components here, while functionally work very well, detail-wise are a little bit soft. Rather than utilizing these pieces here, I went ahead and tooled up new components to be used in their place. Now, unlike many of the other builds in which when I tool up these components, I make them out of resin, just like with the T34 build, rather than using resin for this application, I went ahead and tooled up the new components in casted white metal. The pieces you see here are a new addition to the EastCoastArmory.com product line. They come in a set, and the set comes pre-assembled in the way you see it here on the table. Now, the King Tiger's bump stops had a very specific shape to it and differed greatly from the ones found on the other German tanks. Now, the component here is comprised of 3 pieces. We have here the main housing, which is made from cast metal. This metal here is a lead-free alloy, so you don't have to worry about any type of lead contamination when it comes to handling of these parts. As for the bump itself, the bump stop is housed inside the casing, just like on the real unit, and it is made from a piece of soft, flexible rubber. The detail piece here is casted in resin. Now, even though this part is in resin, it is on a portion of the vehicle which is not necessarily going to be hit or struck by any sort of foreign material due to the way the shape of the housing is formed. Now, like I mentioned with the T34 upgrades, these pieces here are primarily designed for use on radio-controlled tanks. Now, if anyone does have a static King Tiger and they want to upgrade the detail suspension components, a more affordable option compared to the metal offerings here is that I have the exact same component in casted resin. The resin casting utilizes the exact same type of molds for use of the housing, but rather than metal, they are casted in my usual resin material. Now, also included is that of the fasteners that you see here, the same cover cap, and also the exact same flexible rubbery bump stop, which is found in the metal units. Visually, the two pieces will look identical once fully painted and weathered, and this piece here, once fitted to a static tank, will definitely improve it compared to the stock offerings that are found on a vehicle such as the Field of Armor, Jagdtiger, and King Tiger kit. It is at this point here where I could go ahead and get these pieces into primer, and then go ahead and get them installed to the vehicle. And here's the bump stop now mounted to the tank, which you can clearly see on how much it improves the detailing of the piece compared to using the stock unit. Now, as for installation, you do have to modify the holes that are supplied and integrally milled into the side armor plate. Due to the way the new piece is shaped, the new holes need to be drilled in. The piece is held in with that of fasteners, and then of course red Loctite is utilized to prevent anything from backing out, specifically when the tank is in operation. Of course, one of the biggest components that need to be addressed at this point of the build is that of the road wheels. For the road wheels, the design of the road wheels are laid out on the table here. Now, this is just a small swat of the actual parts needed, as obviously it's not going to be beneficial to fit all of the wheels that are supplied with the kit on the table at this point. Breaking down the parts are as follows. Now, these pieces here are identical to the ones that are supplied with the Armortek late production Tigers that have been produced over the years. Starting with the wheel itself, the wheels are comprised of a single aluminum turning. That is obviously all CNC machine, and the detail is on both sides of the wheel, which is a very nice touch. All of the holes are pre-machined and drilled into the face. Moving from the road wheels takes us to the road wheel spacer, which is another piece of CNC'd aluminum, and has its recesses for that of the ball bearings. And the fasteners, which hold everything together. Each unit receives 2 ball bearings, one on each side, which makes for a nice, efficient balancing piece. We have here the Hubcap Mount. The mount itself, again, is another CNC turning. Now, one improvement that Armortek has made to these pieces over the years is that you can see here that there are small little lines machined into the face. On the real King Tiger, as well as the Tiger 1 for that matter, these pieces would actually be 3 separate plates which would be bolted onto the face of the wheel and would keep everything nice and secure. As this would keep the flange portion of the hub, which I'll go over after the scene, it keeps all that mounted to the hub of the wheel, and everything is contained. On the original Armortek King Tigers that were released back in 2009, these pieces here were not included, and it was just a smooth turning. In the past, I would have to go in with a scroll saw or a bandsaw in order to cut these sections out. Now, that procedure is still going to be done on these in order to improve the accuracy and the detail of the parts, but in the past, I would have to mark carefully everything with a pencil. With this little turning here, that's not the case, and this should act as a great guide for me to cut in there with the saw blades to improve the piece further. Moving from the hubs takes us to the wheel retention discs. These are CNC'd steel. They have their countersink sections located. These are pretty much standard on all the Armortek tanks outside of the Shermans, that how you secure the wheel to the swing arm itself. And going to this large section here is that of photo etch. This is just like the photo etch that is found on smaller scale model tanks. And on the King Tiger here, the photo etch is that of the retention plates, which keep the fasteners that are on the rim of the road wheel in place. Now, that is on the real vehicle. As the real vehicle, the road wheels are actually comprised of about 4 different pieces, which have an O-ring, an outer steel rim, and then 2 steel heads that sandwich everything together. That's why these pieces here are found on the real tank, as these fasteners here actually keep everything sandwiched together, and of course you don't want the fasteners getting loose. On the model here, these are purely for detail only, and will be used and mounted out of box. Now I'll go into a procedure that needs to be done to these with the installation shortly after this take. Finally, the last bit we have here is a big bag of small, tiny fasteners. Of course, these are going to be used for all of the fastener needs that are found on these wheels on this tank. And here are the row wheels, now mostly done with their straps, with only a few wheels left remaining. You can see the wheels that once the straps have been mounted, the ends are bent upward and they lock into the fastener, thus preventing them from getting loose. Or this is the purpose behind these on the real unit. On the model here, this isn't really necessary, but it is done for detail purposes. The nuts themselves are held on with that of red Loctite, so you're not going to have to worry about them loosening up on you while the tank is in operation. Now, as for the piece, getting it installed, we have one of the pieces I have here in my hand. The way I like to do it is that before installation, I bend up on the sections on either end with that of a plier, making a skateboard type shape. With the pieces now started with the bending, I can then install the two fasteners, and then when it comes time to the bolting, once the two fasteners are tightened in place with the plier, I could then bend the tab up completely and securing it in its correct orientation. This is a procedure I recommend specifically with these photo etches, as once the piece is bolted on, if it's left flat, getting access to bending it upward in that shape there is going to be very difficult. So it helps to pre-bend it prior to the installation. Once I'm done with the addition of the last few of the straps, I'm going to go ahead and get all of these wheels into their primer and their base coat. From there, I could go ahead with the final assembly. And here are the hubcap mounting flanges with their mods now made. Like I mentioned before, what was needed to have been done was I went ahead and added a complete cut line to these three locations over here. Now, like I mentioned before, on the kit, these were just small indentations, which is an improvement from the original version of the King Tiger release. But to improve it further, I went ahead and cut the piece all the way through. Like I said before, one advantage about the way the Armortek kit is designed is that with these little indentations pre-present on these pieces now, you're going to not have any issues with the saw blade in cutting through into the space here. In the past, you would have to carefully mark these locations with a ruler and then carefully cut the incisions in with that of the saw. With the indentations, that's no longer the case. Now, as for the saw, I use my bandsaw, and I simply cut these pieces in a very slow and methodical manner. This was done for every one of these flange pieces here. Once done, I went ahead with a file, polished away any of the burrs left from the rear portion, left over, of course, from that of the cutting. And here we can see the wheels now ready for final assembly. The versionette over here is all pre-assembled and is ready for its next step. Here we can see the parts that comprise of that. We have the two halves, which have been painted since the last scene. Of course, the little retention plates are present. And to assemble them, I need to point this out because this is something that could confuse some people who are encountering this kit. Now, the pieces all bolt together with that of a flange type assembly, which is again as per the real unit. However, the holes that you see on these pieces here are not exactly symmetrical. And this is not a mistake, this is as per design of the real unit. If we look, you'll see that the holes, even though at quick glance just look like they are evenly spaced, this is not the case. When it comes to lining up these wheels, this is going to be absolutely crucial, as the piece has to be just right in order for all the holes to index properly in order to get the fasteners in. If I rotate it here, you'll see the orientation that I personally like to do when building these wheels. On the portion over here, there's going to be a hole in the center with two small cluster of holes on either side. Let me get close into the camera so you get to see exactly what I'm referring to. These three sets over here are only found on this portion of the hub and the corresponding locations on the wheels. This is also true again for the hubcap as well. It is at this point where I like to index this as the top one, and this is going to be the first place I'm going to put it on a fastener. Now, before lining up, the first thing I'm going to do is install the first ball bearing. Now, the unit does have 2 ball bearings, like I mentioned before. However, with the way the unit is designed is that once assembled, the ball bearing is captive inside of the piece for the outer end. The inner one will stay in place once the piece is mounted onto the swing arm and will be added just prior to the installation of the wheel onto the axle. As for the ball bearing, they should simply just slide right in, like so. Now, sometimes they do require a little bit of effort to get them in. This is simply done with that of a rubber mallet. A few taps and the ball bearing should seat in nice and properly. The tolerances are so that the piece will simply drop right in without any need for removal of any sort of material whatsoever. Now, time to install the piece. I have here the flange, note the single holes on top, and I'm going to find the corresponding hole on the wheel. Now, if you notice, this is going to be important because the wheels do have a front and back face. The version with the strips found on them are the outward face, and the inner face just has that of the fasteners. The inner face will be on the inside portion of the wheel, and so I'm going to have that pointing upward at this point here. Now I'm going to line up the flange. Now it's hard to get on camera, but I'm actually visually inspecting the holes, making sure that they line up. Once that they line up properly, simply just press the piece on, and the unit is now in place. Now, it's at this point here, I take a fastener just to use as a guide, and I'm going to insert it into the hole. With the fastener temporarily inserted, I could then line up the hole on the outer portion of the wheel and find the corresponding location and just drop it directly on. Now, if you notice, the reason why I have to put a little bit of force on it to seat it in properly is because the wheels and the center portion of the flange are coated in primer and paint, and so because that tolerance is going to be a little bit more confined than if done in the white. However, it's not too much of an effort. I just simply put a little bit of pressure with my palm of my hand, and the pieces will seat in nice and completely. At this point now, I can take the outer section of the flange. Again, index the holes accordingly. I cannot stress that enough. And simply drop it in place. It is at this point now where I can add the rest of the fasteners. Of course, red Loctite is going to be utilized on every one of these fasteners in order to keep them firmly in place. After the wheels are totally bolted together with that of the fasteners, it is now time to do the fastener modification. Now, this is something that I do to these builds to give them a little bit more accuracy compared to their stock configuration. Now, on the real King Tiger, the fasteners were not installed on the flange in the same direction. The way the Germans did it was that the fasteners are actually alternating. And what I mean by that is that on one side here, you would have the nut on the outside and the fastener head on the inside portion of the wheel, and on the one directly next to it, it would be in reverse. The nut would be on the inside and the fastener would be on the outside. This is in a set pattern on these wheels here and is necessary in order to improve the accuracy of the build. Now, what Armortek did was the fasteners that they utilized were simple slot screws that are M2 by 5. Now, you can say, well, why don't you just simply replace the slot screws with that of hex fasteners and you don't have to go through this ordeal? The answer to that is that for some reason, specifically with my suppliers of fasteners, I was never able to find a supplier that has these type of fasteners on hand or were able to acquire them in stock. So because of that, I'm going to have to obviously keep the stock fasteners. Now, to improve the look, to give it that more accurate type appearance, I have to modify the fasteners that we have on the flange that we have here. In order to do that, I'm going to show on camera how this procedure is done. Now, this is going to give the illusion that the nut that we have here is not a nut, but is actually a bolt. And to do this, I have to delete the threaded section as well as the hole that's found in the center of the nut and make it nice and flush. And the way I'm going to do this is with solder. The first thing you'll notice that I went ahead and marked all of the fasteners that need this procedure with a marker. As like I said before, there's a certain pattern to which these fasteners were orientated on the real tank, and this needs to be translated to the model. Once the pieces are marked, with a Dremel with a cutting stone, I'm going to polish away the section of the fastener which protrudes slightly from that of the nut. This is actually going to do two things. First, it's going to remove that section, like I said, and it's also going to scuff up the nut and the surface of the fastener itself in order for the solder to flow into this section when it comes time for the addition of that material. So first, I'm going to go ahead and polish down the areas. Once the pieces are grounded off, you can see that when I was grinding them, I went at a nice flat manner, as you don't want to have the fastener be canted to one side or the other. You just want to have a nice flat surface. With the surface nice and flat, I can now add a drop of soldering flux to each of the fasteners. I'll simply apply a drop of the flux with that of a toothpick. The flux is absolutely mandatory in order to get the solder to flow into its correct place. You don't want to put too much, you just want a small little drop, as most of it will burn off, and you don't want there to be excessive cleanup when you're done with the soldering. With the flux added, it's now time to add the solder. Now, for the application, I'll be utilizing a soldering iron in order to add the solder to its correct locations. Now, if you notice, the tip of the soldering iron is very close to the actual filament of the iron. The reason for that has to do with both the length of the fastener as well as also the fact that it's bolted to this aluminum housing. All of these factors act as a heat sink and draw heat away from the soldering iron as well as the solder itself, thus making it cool at a faster rate. What this translates to is that you only have a very small window to work in order to get the solder into the correct location and to a nice smooth manner before it sludges up on you and cools down. Now, like I said before, the tip of the soldering iron I put all the way close to that of the filament. The reason for that has to do with the heat. The further the soldering tip is out, the less heat it actually has that it transfers to the part and thus melting the piece. By bringing it in as close as possible, you're going to get the most amount of heat that the soldering iron can output. When it comes to the actual soldering, this is something that you're going to have to get a feel for, as you're actually going to put a little drop of solder onto the iron and then make contact with the fastener. Everything should melt very quickly and smooth it over onto the head of the fastener. Now, this is why, again, the flux and the grinding is important, as this aids with the solder flow and prevents it from, again, clunking up otherwise. The iron is now fully heated. I'm going to go ahead and start. And there you go. You can see the first one blended over. The center portion has been deleted, and now this nut looks like that of a standard hex bolt. I'll now do this to the remainder of the fasteners. Another good idea is, once you're done with the solder work on the fastener, is to let the iron reheat up again back to its point in order for the solder then to melt in the way you see it here. As if you do this procedure within small gaps of each other or right after one another, you are again drawing heat away from the soldering iron, which will make the job a little bit more difficult as you go through. So periodically stop, wait for a few seconds for the iron to reheat in order to then go again. And the last one has been done. Now, if you notice, this fastener here has slightly too much solder on it and is a little bit domed. This one here, I'm going to polish down. Now, it's a good thing that this happened because if I want to illustrate, if you have any mishap like this, you can easily repair it and it's not a loss. With the Dremel, with the cutting stone, you can polish away and sand away the area in question, which will leave it for a flat surface. Or if you want to redo it again, you simply just repeat these steps like I showed. Hit it with the Dremel, add some flux, and try again with the solder iron if need be. And here goes the fastener with the procedure now complete. As you can see, it better blends in with the remainder of the fasteners found on the part. It is at this point now where the wheel is totally completed in its assembly and is now going to be installed to the tank. Just before I do that though, I am going to remove any sort of remainder of the flux on here with some turpentine just prior to the installation of the part. And here's the lower hull now ready to have its wheels mounted. Just like on many of my other builds, you'll notice that just before I mount on the wheels, I went ahead and added both the coat of base color to the lower hull, as well as some of the underhull weathering. The reason for that is just like I always mention, due to the fact that once the wheels are on, getting access to these lower sections here of the hull are going to be very difficult, if not impossible. So it's a great idea to do this at this point here. In addition to the lower hull, the same was also done to the rear portion here of the wheels. As at this point now, I could begin the wheel mounting procedure. One last step that I do just before the mounting of the wheels has to do with the ends of the axles. Since the last scene, I went ahead and removed the protective masking tape that was added to the axles just before the paint. With the tape removed, the bare steel axles are then covered with a smear of grease. The purpose of the grease is two things. First, it helps with the installation of the row wheels, and secondly, more importantly, it helps prevent and protect the bare steel from any sort of rust or corrosion that may happen. Now, just like I often mention in these videos, when it comes time to mounting of the grease is only added to the side portions of the shafts. You do not want to get them on the face, as you need this area to be without any lubrication so that when you mount on the locking fasteners, the thread lock does not have any sort of debris or a lubricant in the way, which can affect it hardening into the grooves and which will then prevent the fastener from staying secure in place and can loosen up on you while the tank's in operation. Again, this is not something that you want to happen. Now, just like the other German tanks of the period, the King Tiger features an interwoven wheel design, because of which you are going to have to mount the wheels on in layers. Now, unlike vehicles like the Tiger 1, which have 3 or 4 layers per side, the King Tiger, this has been simplified to really only 2. And the wheels themselves are the same type of wheel, and they just get mounted onto the spaced out axle that we have here. The wheel itself, like I showed before, is that of a one single piece unit. And so you're not going to have to worry about any flange work and fastener work that are found on something like an early pattern Tiger 1. If anyone is interested to see how the two vehicles stack up, I strongly recommend watching one of my videos on the early production Armortek Tiger 1s, in which you'll see exactly how the wheels need to be installed on in layers with all their flange work. As for this vehicle though, that's not the case, and I'm going to start the installation procedure. The first thing that needs to be done is that the ball bearing needs to be added to the one space that was left behind on the center hub. Just like I said before, the ball bearings should simply drop directly in place, and if they get stuck, a couple taps with a rubber mallet should seat them in fully. With the ball bearing seated, I simply slide it onto the axle. This same procedure is going to be done for the rest of the inner road wheels. Once the wheels have been slipped onto the axles, then time to secure them. To do this, this is done just like with all the Armortek tanks, and that is a fastener and that of a steel retention washer. Just before the filming of this take, obviously, I went ahead and primed the steel washer, and now with a small drop of red Loctite, I'm going to go ahead and secure all these wheels to their axles. You just thread them in until they bottom out. They are all designed for the fasteners to bottom out at the appropriate length, to which then the wheel is secured in place. As you see, there's no wobble from side to side, which is crucial, specifically on a German tank, due to the way the track teeth need to align. Wheels have a nice roll to them, and the suspension does have a good bounce. And here we have the tank with all of the road wheels now permanently mounted. They will rotate nice and freely, like I showcased before, and you can also see the suspension in full articulation. With the wheels now mounted, the next step is to focus on the hubcaps, which get mounted in these sections over here. They're currently going through their reworking process and are going to be discussed further in the next video update. In addition to the hubs, also what's going to be worked on next is that of the drive sprocket and the rear idler wheel assembly and the wheel itself. Again, more information on this is to come in the next video update. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek King Tiger tank. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, where there are more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as the other 1/6 and smaller scale builds that are found on the ECA channel. Furthermore, don't forget to stop by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale parts and detail components. Thanks for watching.